Last year, Microsoft's CEO said that Microsoft AI technologies are acting as a co-pilot, helping people do more with less. But how do we achieve more with less, and what preparation is involved? My name's Dougie Wood, and I'm the creative director here at Valto. I am also a Microsoft MVP, which is an accreditation given from Microsoft for my hard work and efforts towards the technical community. In this session, I'm going to be talking about what you need to understand about AI, or what I refer to as the 3 R's. How Microsoft AI will be used with files, where you should store those files, and how you can secure the files, as well as how you can become ready for that AI journey. The key takeaways are understanding what is coming, what to start doing in preparation, and how Valto can help your business achieve this AI journey. So starting off, what you need to know, the 3 R's of AI that you must understand. The first R is reward. It's automating tasks. Obviously, this is something which is quite obvious to people, that AI can do things like automation, but there's other areas that people don't necessarily consider. Although we can have cost saving exercises through saving labor and efficiency, maybe even reducing the amount of people that you might need to recruit every single year. There's also other types of cost savings which come from data insights. So AI will serve up information to you in ways that maybe you didn't consider yourself. This could add to further reduce costs, or it could even increase sales if it was to give you insight into people's purchasing habits or buying cycles that maybe you haven't spotted for yourself. It will increase the pace of learning inside of your organization. So this again is something vital to understand, because you could use this as a technology to increase the skills that you have in-house. Only recently, I actually have been trying to learn a little bit of French myself, and I've got a French tutor. But I actually challenged Copilot the other day to talk in French and speak back to me in French so I could practice what I was learning. The other aspects of the rewards of AI comes from its scalability. So it can be as big or as small as you need it to be. And of course, it's available 24/7. Now, can you imagine having, for example, a finance director which didn't sleep, didn't eat, you didn't have to pay them gigantic wages, and they were available 24/7? Well, those are the types of skills that AI can bring to your organization. So that's the first R. But the second is about risk and the risks of AI. So, of course, there's a lot of rewards, but also you need to mitigate the risks of AI. These include rogue AI. Now, what I mean by this is AI acting in a way that you weren't expecting it to act. So this might be, in recent cases, there's been an article in the news about an AI chatbot swearing at customers. Obviously, this isn't something you wanted to do, and even it went a step further, that it had terrible bad behavior in the fact that it was also saying very negative things about the company. So this is because there wasn't strict guidelines about how the AI was supposed to operate and things that it could and couldn't do. Other risks involve giving out unauthorized information. Now, if you just apply AI over the top of all the information that you have got, what is that going to surface? What sensitive information do you not want to be surfaced? And that isn't just externally, that's internally as well. Can you imagine asking a chatbot what the salary was of all the management team and it providing that information back to an end user? These are the types of things which could go on if you weren't securing your information first. Potential risks could involve costs in terms of them becoming a bit of a runaway train. Again, if you've not got a properly structured plan and you're not ready for this, you could easily sign up to something which is going to be quite expensive over the long run. So you need to make sure that you're getting the right licenses for the right people. The other elements of this, which can be quite risky, is how the technology is adopted. Making sure that it's adopted at the right pace so people are using AI at the right time. Of course, there's a lot of concerns about job displacement, and it is a risk. However, properly considering how AI is going to be used by your organization can ensure that that isn't going to be too disruptive to your whole org structure. One of the common ones that I have to tell people about a lot is about making sure that you do not have out-of-date information stored in your environment. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about retention later on, and that's how we can mitigate this particular risk. However, if you think about, would you have a filing cabinet in your office which contains all of the policies from 20 years ago that are no longer relevant, and a big label on the drawer that says, come and help yourself? Now, that's basically what you are doing if you keep your outdated information in your Microsoft 365 environment when Copilot is available to access that information. You want to make sure that anything that it does have access to is in date and is still relevant. The final risk is something which not everybody is even thinking about as a risk, but it is a true risk in terms of your competitors getting the advantage over you by using AI. Again, people that adopt AI can evolve quicker, they can test things quicker, they can get insights quicker. They can do all of these things. They can use a workforce which is 10 times smaller than an organization that's not using AI because they're more efficient and they can use it, as I say, 24/7. It's scalable. But looking at kind of the kind of tech industry, we've seen the likes of Blockbuster go under because Netflix came along and Blockbuster thought they were safe. Oh no, people are always going to want to buy or rent their DVDs on a Friday night. They're going to come into the store, and this is the way that we've always done things. And that phrase is essentially very outdated, and it leads to a lot of risk, whereas Netflix was future thinking. And in fact, they are leading the way with AI technology as well. But you can see here just how somebody an organization like Blockbuster that didn't want to move with the times, didn't want to adopt the new technology, times moved on and they got left behind. And that is, to me, one of the biggest risks of AI. The final R to be thinking about with AI is realistic. Now, being realistic means that you have to be aware of what is scaremongering, as well as what is kind of false, fake promises to a certain extent. And there's a little bit of both going on in the AI space at the moment. AI is often presented, and even sometimes by Microsoft, that it's 100% perfect. There's no challenges, no issues, or it's fully available with all the features and things like that right now. To truth be told, in a lot of aspects, we're still in very early stages of all of this. There is time to create a structured plan, but you do need to start to act today. You need to be thinking about how AI is going to impact your business, because AI is moving at such a pace that if you wait 6-12 months, you're just going to be left behind. AI is not going to take over the world. And I mean that it's not going to be like robots, Terminator in the street and things like that. And it's not going to take your job. However, somebody that knows how to use AI better than you is likely going to take your job. So it is a skill that's necessary for everybody in the industry to be upskilling on now, to be prepared for how it's going to impact the day-to-day working life in the not so distant future. So bearing all that in mind, how are we going to use AI for professional use? And how will Microsoft AI be used with files? So let's take a little look at how Copilot for Microsoft 365 is going to be used. So the first part of it is Word documents, the ability to generate content. And this could be, say, FAQs as part of a document that you've been working on. It's consistent with other documents and allowing you to write in a specific style every time. You can make it sound a bit more like how you want it to sound, with it a bit more sort of positive, a bit more kind of direct. You can make it how you want it to sound. So let's take a little look at an example of how Copilot is being used inside of Microsoft Word. So this is an example where a file has been created from a workshop transcript of a meeting inside Microsoft Teams. The transcript is from a workshop, as I say. It's then we're going into Copilot, we're asking it to draft up a report for us. We can read it as it's going along, but also we can then go in and ask it to summarize that document if we wanted to. Copilot will allow you to summarize the document and even give little suggestions of how it could be improved. We can see here, we can see all the participants of the meeting and the purpose of the workshop. It will also do things like suggesting, should we have a call to action added to this document? We can even do things like ask it such information of who spoke the most in the meeting. It will then figure that out and come back and say, this person spoke the most in the meeting. And that's all based on just text that's been provided inside of this document. I just want to credit as well that this video was actually provided by a good friend of mine who runs a YouTube channel called The Copilot Connection. There's a few more good demonstrations from there as well. So that was Microsoft Word. But what about Excel? So Excel, you can ask questions to analyze data with auto-generating tables and visualizations to give you the insights that you require. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm mediocre at best at using Excel. But when it comes to Copilot, you can actually get it to create things for you and provide information in a way that maybe you hadn't even thought about accessing it. You can talk to it in a human readable language and say, for example, from this very large data set, tell me what month did we do the most sales in, for example. And it could go away and tell you that information. Just would come back and say, the best month for sales has been October or something like that. The other products as well that Copilot will interact with is the likes of PowerPoint. You could generate content, images, notes and animations, taking ideas from Word documents for polished presentations. So one thing which is very common, and I don't know about you, but it is in my world, is that quite often there'll be a set of data. Quite often it starts in Excel, so it's tables of information, sales values, the amount of support requests we've had, all this sort of, it's data essentially that's kind of been bundled together. We could use Copilot to give us some insights into that. And then we could ask Copilot to use that information, go and create, say, for example, some PowerPoints. So we can actually present this back to, say, the management team or the board of directors and say, this is what we found from this Excel. Then once we've got that, maybe we want to create a short one-page PDF insight that we can then share with a wider organization to make them aware of something that we found out via using Copilot to analyze and then present that information back. So it's really useful that we can use Copilot in PowerPoint to speed up that process. And then finally, what I wanted to talk about was Outlook. Now, we can summarize emails and we can identify priorities and draft responses in your writing style for efficient inbox management. In fact, I've got a little example of this working inside of the Outlook app on a mobile phone. So again, this is actually sped up a little bit just to show you how it looks. But we can summarize whole email threads, and we've all been there. There's email threads with tens, maybe hopefully not hundreds, but a lot of different responses and replies in there. And we can go back and we can say, summarize all of this for me, so I can see a summary. And I can even respond or get Copilot to respond for me by drafting out something to say, this is how I want you to respond. But we can also change the tone of voice. So maybe we want it a bit more direct. So it's going to be a bit shorter, maybe a bit blunter, but it's going to get to the point much quicker. But there's other ways we could be a bit more casual, a bit more neutral. There's different tones of voice. We can make the response shorter, we can make the responses longer, and we can get it to customize a little bit of how we want it to respond on our behalf. So this is a great way, as I say, we could use Copilot directly inside of Outlook. But what about Microsoft 365 Teams and using Copilot inside of Teams? So Copilot inside of Teams will allow you to summarize one-to-one chats and channels to get a similar summary like what we were just looking at from our email threads. It can generate chats and responses. It also has a feature for intelligent meetings recaps, highlighting what you have missed and where you have been mentioned. It captures notes and visualizes in a whiteboard. You can summarize previous phone calls and generate documents from this information. I've been using this recently and I find it really useful, the fact that it knows the minutes that have been taken during the Teams meeting, but also what I found really useful is the actions as well. So essentially it means that we don't have to slow down a meeting while someone's writing actions. We can wait for Teams to produce the list of actions following the meeting. So that was everything that we think that people will be using Copilot for in the very near future. But how do we prepare for that? And what steps do we need to take to ensure that our files are actually ready for Copilot? To start off that process, I want to talk a bit about where you should store your files. And this still amazes me that people are still not sure where to store their documents. And I'm not surprised, because it can be very confusing. And sometimes as we're going to work through this, you'll see why it's a bit confusing. So where should you store your files? So starting off, we've got OneDrive. Now, OneDrive is your personal document storage space. And I always advocate that people make the most of this, because each user gets a terabyte of storage space. It's also great for external sharing. So if you're using things like Dropbox or WeTransfer or some of these other third parties which are not Microsoft, meaning they are not governed properly by your organization, OneDrive is a great solution for that. And quite often when people are dipping their toe into external sharing, they start off by opening OneDrive first before starting to open up SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. So OneDrive is a great place to store information. It's mostly used as a bit of a dumping ground, to be honest, of all your drafts and all the kind of images and things like that you might have been using as part of presentations and things like that. But it's best to store it in there rather than putting it in a storage space which is designed for people to collaborate, say for example like SharePoint or Teams, because you don't want to clog up that storage space. I always tell people to make the most of OneDrive, because let's say for example in an organization of say 200 users, you might find on average, and this is just take this with a pinch of salt, but every single SharePoint site and every single team combined might only be say 2 terabytes of storage space. And that's every single file, every single thing that happens inside of SharePoint and Teams. Whereas to put into comparison, technically you've got 200 terabytes of OneDrive storage space. So don't fill up all of the storage space of SharePoint and Teams with things that people don't need to access. If it's just drafts and things that only you should have access to, store that inside of your OneDrive. Then we've got SharePoint. So this is a great place to create an information sharing platform known as an intranet, but you can also open it up externally to create what we call an extranet, which is a bit like a secure website that you have to be authenticated to access. It allows you to have files for everybody stored in one place. A single source of truth is often what I refer to it as, because you can store things like company templates, policies, procedures, as well as forms, all in one place. Then we've got Microsoft Teams, which again is a storage space. It allows you to have files that are being collaborated on within your department or your business unit or a project or a team that's working together. But it is essentially just SharePoint in the background, but it's a SharePoint team site. So I'm not going to get too specific about that, but SharePoint and Teams are very similar, but I like to refer to SharePoint as the kind of front face, the intranet, and Teams is more of a kind of siloed departments, projects, collaborational space. And then the final one here is the bin. So when you're preparing for AI, it's a perfect time to cleanse and get rid of any documents or old information that's not required. Going back to that risk that we talked about earlier, if you've got outdated information that's surfaceable by end users via AI like Copilot, then you're going to be serving up things that you don't want your end users to actually be consuming. So now's the time to get shut of anything that you shouldn't or don't want others to be accessing. So following on from that, we talked a bit about SharePoint and the purpose of SharePoint, and you might already be using SharePoint. There's a good chance that you are already using SharePoint for something, whether it's an intranet, whether it's for document storage, whether it is a replacement of a file share, or you're using Microsoft Teams. Copilot can access anything that the user can currently access, even if the user is not aware of what they have access to. In fact, I saw this in very small doses a few years ago when there was a few different kind of semi-type of AI features that came to SharePoint, where it was surfacing documents that was saying around you, which were things which were your colleagues were working on and things like that, but you had access to those files. But I got an influx of support requests and questions asked to me from my clients who were asking about, well, who has access to this information? Why is it that Joe Blogs in a different team can see this information? And it's because the permissions of SharePoint were not correctly set up. So people technically had access to those files all along. They could have used the search box to find them if they wanted to. But I predict that Copilot is going to have the same type of problem where it's going to surface things that people didn't realize they had access to. Copilot will only provide insights from sites and the contents based on the permissions that are used by the logged in user. So it will never surface something that they don't have access to, but it's vital that you understand what your permission structures of SharePoint are currently to make sure that Copilot isn't working double time and going off and finding information on the user's behalf that they would never have found on their own. Site collections and permissions should be analysed and reviewed to ensure no risk of confidential information being made available to the user, inclusive of broken inheritance and sharing. What we're saying is you need to audit this, and if you don't know how to do this, you can reach out to Valto and we can help you with this. This is not new. This is something that we've been doing for a long time, helping people control the access of SharePoint. There are certain types of scripting and services available for reporting on site collections and data and permissions. There are tools out there which can help, but they're quite expensive. It might be worth reaching out to a Microsoft partner like Valto, and we can help you understand how the permissions are currently structured and give you recommendations on how they should be structured to ensure that the right people have access to the relevant files. Now, if you don't have access to something, and users can interact with Copilot and may ask questions that would typically return data they do not have access to, in these scenarios, Copilot will be unable to return any results. So say, for example, if I didn't have access to a SharePoint site, you can see at the top right-hand corner, if I tried to navigate to that SharePoint site, it would say, sorry, you don't have access, and you can request access. Copilot is grounded to the logged-in user. Therefore, if they are unable to access the data, then Copilot will also be unable to access it on their behalf. So, for example, we've asked it about a specific project on the right-hand side, and because it doesn't have access, it's going to say, I'm sorry, but I can't find that specific information about that project. And that's because it doesn't have access. It can't see it because it's working in the context of the current user who doesn't have access to it. And that's exactly, say, for example, if that project, Obsidian, was a very private, very sensitive project, we wouldn't want everybody to be able to access that, and we wouldn't want Copilot to surface that information. So that's why it's vital that the security and the permissions of your files are properly set up before you jump into using Copilot. Thinking on the same topic of security, it's also about sensitivity of the data. So you can apply sensitivity labels, and labels are used to classify emails and documents, SharePoint sites, and more different types of data that's stored inside of Microsoft 365. These can be added manually or even automatically. So, for example, you can set files as high confidential if they include sensitive information like Project Obsidian we were just talking about. Labels can encrypt data and add content, marking and control user access. Data is encrypted at source, so if a file is shared with an external or attached to an email, then it would still be locked. The way that I try and explain sensitivity labels to people is, let's say, for example, you've got Joe Bloggs who works in the sales team, and he has handed in his notice and he's going to work on his last day on Friday. Now, without sensitivity labels, technically there's nothing stopping him from downloading, say you've got an Excel spreadsheet with all of your customers' information in there, phone numbers, contacts, when their contracts are up for renew, things like that. There's nothing to stop Joe Bloggs from sales from downloading that file, taking it home, put on a pen drive, uploading it to his home computer, and when he starts his new job on Monday, having at it on your customer database. However, if that file had been protected by a sensitivity label, as soon as Joe Bloggs' Microsoft 365 account has been blocked, he no longer has access to those files. And that means wherever those files live. So even if he had taken the file home, put it on a pen drive, took it home, put it on his home computer, as soon as he tried to log in, it would ask him for his Microsoft 365 details. It would know that he no longer worked for the organization, and you could even get it to purge the file off at that point if you wanted to. And you can make sure that the documents are always being authenticated to, so that you do not allow people to access information that they shouldn't have access to. So sensitivity labels are really important for that purpose. And we can see a little bit of this in action. So sensitivity labels for your document will increase the highest restriction of content that you have pulled from and referenced. Sensitivity labels will automatically apply to your document if Copilot generates content that matches with the sensitivity information type rules. For example, Project Obsidian has immediately made the document more sensitive than when it was first created. So you can get Copilot to automatically set sensitivity labels based on what it is that you're working on. So you can see at the top there that your instructions contain one or more sensitive files. Referencing them may update the sensitivity of your document. So say, for example, Project Obsidian, it contained a bunch of information about, let's say, for example, secret recipes from your company. Then if those secret recipe files already had sensitivity labels applied to them, and you were trying to create some new files that was referencing those documents, it would automatically apply the sensitive information label. So we've talked about the sensitivity, but also looping back to that point about having old data stored. This is where you want to be considering the retention of the files and making sure that you're not holding on to things for any longer than you need to. Ensure you're only holding data for as long as the company needs it, and consider if any information is no longer relevant. You can extend data retention policies to cover Teams chats and Copilot interactions to ensure that content is removed from your system within configured timeframes. Review information that is stored within Microsoft 365 to ensure that it is still relevant. Otherwise, Copilot could be providing your employees outdated information. So, going back to this point, you could apply what they call retention labels to make sure that you're only holding that type of information for the period of time that you need to. So quite often things like financial information might be held for 7 years and it can't be deleted before that. That could be something that's automatically applied. Whereas it could be something which is an employee record, and maybe you only hold that for 12 months after the employee leaves. So there's different things you could apply dependent on the scenario. So how can you approach all of this? How can you structure a strategy? So Valto offer a 1-day on-site or remote, if you want to split it over 2 days, AI strategy workshop. The objective of our Copilot and AI strategy workshop is to ensure you understand the services provided by Microsoft 365 and Copilot. We explore the ways in which that you will benefit and your organizational growth will be achieved through efficiency in alignment with your organization's objectives. In addition, the correct advice and tools will be provided to ensure that you can be prepared to introduce AI into the business. At a very high level, now of course the day is a bit more detailed than this, but I've just tried to give you a flavour of the agenda of the strategy workshop. We'd begin with introductions so you can find out a bit more about Valto. We would want to understand your current ways of working, and as well as objective setting of what does good look like? What is the objective of using AI in your organization? Then we would go into talking about Copilot, Microsoft Copilot in Windows, Copilot, which is formerly Bing Chat, Copilot for Microsoft 365, and more. We then talk about the preparation, and we've talked a bit about this so far in this webinar, but we would want to talk a bit more about data cleansing, migration and retention, and security assessment. So all of those 3 pillars that we talked about in this webinar, we're going into a lot more detail and understand how all of this was relevant to your organization. Also, which is very important, we talk about licenses. Who should be licensed, which is very important. It doesn't mean everyone has to be licensed, but you find out who should be licensed. We'll discuss how it's licensed, which actually involves needing a Microsoft partner to purchase those licenses for you. We'll discuss the costs which are involved and how you can ensure that costs do not snowball and become a runaway train. We'll also talk about adoption. The Valto Adoption Specialization is actually an award that we have been given by Microsoft because of strict kind of guidelines that we follow, workshop processes, and other types of policies that we follow to ensure that adoption of new technologies is successful for our clients. We'll talk about training options and guides and materials that can be provided. Different types of training at different levels for different people. We can even provide a train the trainer type of approach if you have a learning development team in-house. We'll also talk about adoption strategies and materials, how to get buy-in from people at an early stage to make sure that none of this is frightening or scary in any way, shape or form, and that people buy into this from day one. So on that note, I just wanted to say, if you wanted to contact us, there is a link in the comments below and in the description of this video. You can fill out the form and you can get in contact with us today. We'll schedule with you a free, no obligation meeting in which we'll talk to you a bit more about the workshop, how it works, and the typical types of projects and how we can deliver them for you. If you've got any questions at all, I'm going to leave this running now just for another 5 minutes, and I will answer any questions that you have inside the comments below. I want to thank you for joining, and I'm going to leave you on a kind of a recap of something that I mentioned earlier, and this is my prediction for AI. My prediction is that AI isn't going to take your job, but somebody that knows how to use AI better than you will take your job. So consider that as you're moving into this journey of starting to use AI. Thank you very much for watching this webinar.